Okay, we're on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the mandatory yearly corporate compliance training for CASA-Trinity for the year 2021. Unless you are a new member of the staff, welcome. You may be watching this as part of your orientation. So we welcome you to the team. My name is CG Perkins. I'm the corporate compliance officer here. I also do quality assurance.
My name is Michelle Jensen. I am co-corporate compliance officer with CG. I also do operations for the agency.
Yep. So we will be providing the training to you, and we'll actually be, as part of the presentation, sharing a PowerPoint, which will also be in the S drive that you'll be able to look back at in the future if you need to. So just bear with us one moment. We got to share our screen. Make sure this. Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Yes. All right. So corporate compliance here, why do we have it? What are the benefits? Why should staff care? Really just to break down corporate compliance, it's just a way for us to have a checks and balances within the organization, both personally, professionally, as well as a whole, agency, to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to follow not only agency policies and procedures, but also all of the our regulatory agency policies and procedures to make sure that we're doing the best that we can in order to have a high level of integrity, in order for CASA-Trinity to really just function at the level that it needs to. Do you have anything to add, Michelle?
The benefits of corporate compliance is that it allows us to be held accountable. It allows us as an agency to grow. It allows us as an agency to become better at what we do. Our best practices always have room for improvement. Corporate compliance allows us for an avenue to be able to make those policy changes and staff changes as we need to, according to the corporate compliance program. Staff should care because all of us hold a piece in this. All of us should hold each other accountable. All of us should have some basic knowledge of corporate compliance, how to report, who to report to. So this is why we're doing this training, so that all of the staff get a yearly refresher that have been with the agency for a year. But for all of the new staff, you have the benefit of seeing this video and have an opportunity to get this firsthand before you're even sent to the site that you're going to be working.
Mm-hmm. The first thing that we want to discuss, super important, is HIPAA. So HIPAA is the Federal Insurance Probability and Accountability Act of 1996. It's a federal law that required the creation of national standards to protect sensitive patient health information from being disclosed without the patient's consent or knowledge. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, issued the HIPAA privacy rule to implement the requirements of HIPAA. So the HIPAA security rule protects a subset of information covered by the privacy rule, which we're going to get into on the next slide. So that privacy rule, it strikes a balance that permits important uses of information while protecting the privacy of people who seek care and healing. So covered entities are healthcare providers, insurance companies, healthcare clearinghouses, we fall under the healthcare providers. So what that really means is that if we do not have a release signed by that person, that client that we're serving, for that person, agency, we can't even say that we know them. We will get further in down the road a little bit and talk about when we can break that confidentiality, but I highly suggest, this is super important, that if you do not have a release signed for that by that person, you cannot disclose any information. So on this slide that we drafted, we put some information here about so protected health information, or PHI, you may refer to people, some people may refer to it as PHI. So some of this information on the slide may not relate to us here at this agency, but I always like to provide people with information. because knowledge is power. And so, but a lot of this we do deal with, like names, geographical identifiers. So anything that's like an address, anything to be able to relate back to that patient. Dates possibly could, like date of births, even sometimes admission dates, phone numbers, fax numbers, email addresses, social security numbers, anything that could somehow relate back to that patient to be able to identify who that patient is protected under the HIPAA law.
That ties them back to our agency and
Right.
receiving services.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So because we are a substance use disorder provider, we have to follow a law that is stricter than HIPAA. It's 42 CFR Part 2. So this protects substance use disorder patient records. It's stricter than HIPAA. So where you would see the difference with that is that releases that pertain to substance use disorder, releasing any of that information absolutely has to have on those releases indicating 42 CFR Part 2. Some releases, and if you look on ours, it does indicate on there 42 CFR Part 2. Some releases, there can be a little bit of way to get around that. And that's if it specifically says on there, like, hey, this information on this may be substance use related. Or even you'll see on there like HIV/AIDS related. If at any time you ever have a question whether a release is,
Compliant with 42 CFR.
yes, please just send them my way. People do that all the time. I have no problem looking at that because it is really important. I know sometimes it seems like it's just like something else that we have to do, but it's the law. It's a federal law, and we absolutely have to follow that. So it's super important to make sure that all of our releases are compliant. However, sometimes we get releases from other agencies, like a hospital or something, and they're not necessarily always 42 CFR Part 2 compliant. So I always like to err on the side of caution, and I'm always one to ask questions before I just assume that something is okay. So it's really important, whether you really reach out to your supervisor to ask or ask myself or Michelle, hey, can you look in so-and-so's chart and see if this release is okay or not? Please just ask. I think Michelle and I are pretty much on the same boat, as in like, we would rather get 30 different questions a day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Than and answer those than to not have a question. And then somewhere down the road, we get into some kind of trouble in regards to anything, really.
Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation, but I would say exactly what CG said. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'd rather field those questions than have people make an assumption on what they should or shouldn't do.
Yep. All right. So when can we break confidentiality? There are a few instances, because we are mandated reporters, right? So if we suspect whether it's child or an incapacitated adult abuse or neglect, we absolutely have to report those. If a patient comes in and they say they're going to hurt themselves or someone else, they have a plan, they have an intent, we absolutely have to report those. And then also a court-ordered subpoena signed by the judge, we have to provide that. So in those instances, we do not need a release to be able to share information. And we do have to report those things. Okay. Something that we also have to make sure that we are doing. So it's redisclosure of information because we are 42 CFR. This is any time that we are wanting to share information to, say, another agency that comes from a different agency. So an example I like to use is, say, if I'm a clinician in the Myra Clinic, I have a client that just came from St. Joe's BSU or is here for an assessment. And I assess this patient and I'm like, they need to go to inpatient somewhere. And I want to send them to White Deer Run. So St. Joe's BSU sent me over a great medical assessment. They sent me over their PPD results. They sent me over a medication list and any kind of like assessment from there. I cannot send that with my referral to White Deer Run unless I have this redisclosure filled out. So what this is indicating is that that patient, the client that came in to see me for that assessment, is going to sign this redisclosure release saying that they give me permission to share that information from St. Joe's BSU to White Deer Run. And on here, it's pretty self-explanatory. I believe this is in the 1011 chart as well at this point. But we are providing, we're going to fill this release out. The extent or nature of information to be disclosed would be medical assessment, PPD results, whatever I'm trying to share. And then the purpose or need for disclosure would be referral, to White Deer Run. And then, so this between would be from St. Joe's BSU, and then you're going to send it to White Deer Run. And then you would just have the patient print, sign, and date.
So what I'm understanding, CG, is that we didn't produce it.
Right.
We can't share it unless that redisclosure form is completed.
Mhm.
For those of you that are new to the agency, 1011 is our electronic health record. If you are hired on as a clinician or someone in quality assurance, medical records, you will be using the medical record chart quite a bit. If you were hired on in another function, 1011 may not be something that you will need access to.
Yes. So this is super important. So just to piggyback off what you said, Michelle, if we did not produce it ourselves, we cannot re-release that to anyone unless we have this filled out. Now, if I didn't have anything from St. Joe's BSU, I can freely just send over, our assessment, whatever urine screen results we may have or something. That's okay. Of course, we still want to fill out a regular release, but we don't have to necessarily have this redisclosure.
Exactly.
Yes. So like we say, Michelle and I say all the time, especially throughout this, if you ever have any questions in the future, please just ask. Because we understand that this is a lot of information being thrown at you at once. But we are here to answer any questions. We do have an additional HIPAA training that we would like everyone to complete, and we will be sending those links out. If you are new to the agency, this will be included
as part of your orientation.
Yep. So no worries. And this training is about like an hour. It's virtual. They will actually email you your certificate of completion. And what we liked about this is that it broke down HIPAA a little more to understand a little better. And, we're all about knowledge is power. Right. Reporting on to Michelle.
So reporting, as an agency, we have several levels of reporting. If you are in our New York programs, I'm going to cover some Justice Center information. If you're in our Pennsylvania programs, Justice Center will not apply to the PA programs, but we're still going to cover that because this is an all-inclusive training. We're going to talk about our corporate compliance reporting, our internal incident reporting, and why we have HIPAA breaches included in that is because we want folks in our New York programs to recognize the fact that, as CG and I just discussed in the previous slides, HIPAA is important. We need to be very cognizant and diligent as we follow all of our HIPAA rules and regulations. If we don't follow them, OASIS, who is our funding entity, is very clear that any HIPAA breach, potential HIPAA breach, or suspected HIPAA breach needs to be reported to the Justice Center. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Justice Center reporting, but that's why we felt important to break it down in our reporting slide here. So Justice Center reporting, if you are currently employed, you've probably heard us talk about the Justice Center a lot. It's very important. If you're a new employee, we're going to cover the Justice Center pretty thoroughly. The Justice Center is a New York State program. It was devised in 2016. The reason why the Justice Center was brought into the O agencies was because at the time, Governor Cuomo felt it very important that any abuse or neglect on behalf of a staff member to a vulnerable person needed to have some outside investigation if necessary. So we want to make sure that all staff realize if you are working in a licensed program, our clinics in New York, our bedded programs, any of those programs are required to report any alleged abuse and neglect directly to the Justice Center. The number for that is 1-855-373-2122. Write that down, take a little note. It's very important that you guys have that information. When we report to the Justice Center, it is vital, crucial, and regulatory that that report goes into the incident, into the Justice Center at the time of finding. What I mean by time of finding is today at noon, you realize that one of the staff members has just knocked down one of our patients that live in our residential program. They pushed them over. That's immediately reportable to the Justice Center today, not tomorrow, not 2 weeks from now, the day that you find it. It's very important that you contact the Justice Center on the day of the report. You can contact CG&I to get some guidance on whether or not an incident should be reported to the Justice Center. But CG&I are not able to make that call for you. That call needs to be made to the Justice Center from the person that finds it. So you have to report that information. Again, CG&I will be glad to give you some guidance, some tips, some tools, some tricks, so that when you are ready to make that phone call, you have all of the information that you need to be able to do that. What also is very important is if you are a credentialed employee, if you hold a CASAC, a nursing registered nurse, a licensed nurse, if you are a certified peer, what I want to make very clear for folks in that capacity is if you are reported to the Justice Center as the person that has done something that's reportable to the Justice Center, not only are you going to be responsible to being reported to the Justice Center, it is our responsibility to report you to the credentialing agent. So there's two separate investigations that happen there. One from the Justice Center and one that's going to happen separately from the regulatory entity, whether it be the Office of Professional Medical Services, whether it be from OASIS or the certified peer entity. Folks forget that there may be two different investigations, and CG&I recognize the importance of that CASAC or that registered nurse or that certified peer certificate that you got. Staff spend a lot of time, they spend a lot of money, and they spend a lot of resources to make sure that they get those credentials necessary to do the job that they've been hired for. And CG&I want everybody to have the information so that they're not involved in a Justice Center investigation, so that we don't have to make that report to the credentialing agency, because we don't want you to lose your credentials because you were named in a Justice Center investigation. What happens once that report is gone into the Justice Center is going to determine whether or not they have enough information to conduct the investigation from their end, or if they feel that it's something that could be investigated by the agency itself. If you are involved in a Justice Center investigation that the Justice Center has taken on as theirs, CG&I can do no more investigation. We have to comply with the Justice Center's regulations. Once they take that investigation on, CG&I take a step back. The only role that she and I play in that is a liaison role, is a role where we're going to help the investigator set up some interviews, perhaps find locations. We're going to provide them with any documents that they may have requested, but we cannot do any more investigation. Oftentimes, CG and I will get a question of, what's that investigation about, or why is the Justice Center calling us? We can't relay that information. We can only tell you that you need to comply with that. It is your responsibility to be 100% approachable and answer any of the questions and provide any of the information that the Justice Center is asking for, regardless of consent. I know we've had a couple times where employees have said, I didn't give the Justice Center the information they were looking for because I didn't have consent for that. Justice Center trumps consent. So we need to make sure that we are not held in contempt for monkeying up that investigation in any way, shape, form, or manner, because the Justice Center are pretty powerful. They have the right to remove people from programs. They have the right to remove you from employment. They have the right, if the investigation is substantiated and it's a pretty tough case, for lack of a better word, they can blacklist you. So I say this not to scare you. Again, knowledge is power. We're going to say that 100 times, but I say that because I want folks to completely understand what the role is as staff members, what the role is of the Justice Center, and what the outcome could potentially be from that. Right here on this slide, you're going to see a resource card that the Justice Center has provided to us. What's really nice about this card is it provides you with a phone number. It also provides you with some information. Again, remember, Justice Center reportable incidents are abuse and neglect from a staff member to a patient. So it is very important that you make that comparison very well, because a lot of the times they think it's two staff members fighting, or it's two staff members that have gotten involved in a situation. It is staff involved with patient. The code of conduct. This is something that comes from the Justice Center. We're not going to talk a lot about this because this is an HR function. The code of conduct is a form that you see here that you're going to be held responsible to. And here's where I get on my soapbox a little. I want folks to make sure that they read this code of conduct thoroughly. Because what you're doing is you're signing off on something that you're going to be held accountable to. And these 10 areas, non-discrimination, advocacy, relationships, all of these are areas where we as staff members, because we work in this environment, are going to be held accountable to. So oftentimes when our staff are involved in a Justice Center investigation, the first document the Justice Center asks us for is the code of conduct. Why? Because let's use an example that a staff member has gotten involved in a personal relationship with one of the patients. Now, we know, because we have read the code of conduct thoroughly, that this is discouraged. It's not acceptable behavior. But yet we have a staff member that's engaged in that type of relationship. The first thing that often the staff member will say to the Justice Center investigator is, I didn't know I couldn't do that. Well, yes, you did, because you've signed off on the code of conduct that this is not acceptable behavior. You've also signed off on the code of ethics from the agency perspective that clearly outlines that as well. But my soapboxes here is make sure you read it thoroughly. If you read it and you don't understand it and you have questions, give CG and I a call. We will certainly answer them to the best of our ability. This document is done at the time of hire. This document is then done yearly after that. That's a requirement from the Justice Center. So look for that coming from Human Resources. This here is a copy of our internal incident reporting. This is the second piece of our reporting. Justice Center separate from internal. An internal incident may be that we had a client fall. We may have had a medical emergency, a seizure that might have required an ambulance or nurse's attention. We may have had a psychiatric emergency that required us to seek guidance from a mental health facility. We may have had contraband brought into the agency. So when these types of things happen, the incident report gets written. What I want to be very clear on is this incident report needs to be completed within 24 hours. So, if the incident happens at 8 o'clock in the morning, you've got till 8 o'clock the next morning. If this incident happens on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock and you're not supposed to be back to work again till Monday, that is when next day of business is allowable. This incident report is pretty easy to fill out. You can look at it very easily. It kind of reads like a book. But what I want folks to be very clear about is when you are filling this out, make sure that you give us the incident from the beginning to the middle to the end. If you know what might have led up to that incident, say a psychiatric emergency, and we know that our patient has been struggling, document that in the section where you're allowed to do that. In the middle, what I mean by the middle is what were the staff's responses to that? What staff responded? How did we respond? The end, what do I mean by that? Was the patient transported by ambulance? Were the police involved? Did we get them hooked up with mental health in a follow-up appointment? What happened? Do we know what the results of that were? If they were transported to a psychiatric facility, were they kept? Were they admitted to that? So why it's important to give us the most detailed information that you can give us is because our incident review committee, the IRC committee, meets 6 times yearly to discuss all of the incidents that have been brought to our attention. And we discuss these thoroughly. We're looking for trends. We're looking for any data that might help us, again, from a corporate compliance perspective, determine what do we need to do as an agency for a corrective action plan. You might hear us refer to that as a CAP. And I'll use a very simple one. See, for instance, I've received 4 reports from the Elmira Clinic that we've had a patient fall on our stairs. It's a pretty likely incident, but from a perspective of corporate compliance and a corrective action plan, we're going to talk about that as an internal review committee. And we're going to say, listen, let's go down. I'm going to have our maintenance guy take a peek at the stairwell, see if there's debris on the stairs, if there's a piece of carpet runner that might have popped up, any of those things that we might do that's going to prevent this particular incident happening in the future. So we do a thorough discussion about our incidents 6 times a year. And it does help us determine whether or not there's policy change, anything that we made to do correctively. We also want, if you have made an incident report to the Justice Center, a report to them, to complete one of these as well, just so that we have an internal document and a case number to make reference. Why is the case number important? Because when the Justice Center contacts CG&I, they will often refer to the case number.
Okay, so this one here is about being a mandated reporter. I know we talked a little bit about this before, but this one is in regards to the possible child abuse or neglect. And so if we come across a situation and we suspect that child abuse or neglect, because we're a mandated reporter, we do have to report that. It's not our job to determine if it is abuse or neglect, but it is our job to report the possibility of it. So there's an 800 number that we call, 1-800-635-1522. And that's for that's the mandated reporter line for the New York State suspected child abuse or neglect. So we would report to them the information that we know. So like names of the adults, the kids, addresses. It's always good to try to collect as much information as you can when you do call them. The people that answer will just ask you the questions, and you do your best at answering them. So after you are done with that, you have to then fill out a couple more reports. So you have to fill out this one, which is the New York State report, and then you send it to the county of origin. So wherever that suspected child abuse or neglect is, you have to send it to that county. Um, and then also, we would like it if you filled out an internal agency incident report. And it's not because we do anything with them, it's because we go over them in our incident review meetings, not to really discuss it, but to indicate that we had, this many reports.
It's part
pretty
of our
much.
tracking and trending that OASIS requires us to do.
Yep. And then I ask that we not upload these reports into 1011 into that client chart. And for a couple of reasons. One, we don't need to be putting that into the 1011 chart, but also if we receive a subpoena from the court, I have to provide those courts with all of the documentation. So we do not want this part of that. You can, save it. Of course, after you send it to that county of origin, save a copy of it for your own records, because you never know, down the road they may be like, hey, do you have this or something? So of course, any questions with this, whether you think it's a possible child abuse or neglect, you can call the 800 number. You can always ask your supervisor. You can ask myself or Michelle. We have no problems answering questions. Then the thing with all of these, all of our agency forms, they are on the S drive under agency forms.
Before we go into this particular slide, I want to make a quick reference to our Pennsylvania folks that have been hired in our Pennsylvania programs.
Yep.
The incident reporting for Pennsylvania is a little bit different. That all goes through DDEP. There's an electronic form that is completed, and all incidents in Pennsylvania get reported to DDEP. Pennsylvania does not have a justice center per se. While all of our staff are held to the expectations of the Justice Center, Pennsylvania folks do not have to report to the Justice Center.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens with the incidents in Pennsylvania is there's a very quick form. It's very HIPAA compliant. It goes to the supervisor. The supervisor then uploads that to DDEP, which is their regulatory entity in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to make clear of that so that the folks in Pennsylvania weren't doing the work in New York that they didn't need to do. So again, if you're in Pennsylvania, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be more than glad to give you a buzz. The other piece in regards to reporting is the corporate compliance reporting. The best way that I can differentiate what corporate compliance reporting is versus what incident reporting is. As we talked about, incident reporting is reporting that involves a patient. It's patient related, staff to patient, patient to patient, individual patient. Corporate compliance reporting is a report that is made if we feel a staff member is not working within the guidelines and the constraints that are set forth by our regulatory entities.
Mm-hmm.
They may be committing fraud. They may be not documenting correctly in our electronic health record. They may be not using the proper codes in our electronic health record.
Mm-hmm.
It's anything that goes against our policy and procedure or the regulations set forth by either DDAP in Pennsylvania or by OASIS in New York. So an example of a corporate compliance report may be you as a clinician sit across the hall from CG as a clinician, and you see CG have 6, 7, 8, 9 clients come out of her office within an hour. And we know, and you're going to know as a clinician, that appointments are geared for certain times.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way that CG is going to be able to bill for all 9 of those individuals within that hour, because appointments are supposed to be either 15 minutes,
15, 30,
or 30 or an hour, depending on what it is and what the services that you're providing. So it's your responsibility to complete a corporate compliance report form, send it to CG&I so that we can do our investigation. What's very key, very important here is that once you do that, there's no discussion. We don't want you going over to your office mate in the next office going, oh my God, did you see CG? She was having 9 people come out of that office in an hour, and I just filed a corporate compliance form against her. We don't want you to do that for a variety of reasons. It's private information. It's confidential. Your report is confidential. The person that you made that report about is never going to know that. We don't want other people brought into the investigation that need not be brought into that investigation. So we ask you that you make no discussion about this, no chit chat around the water cooler about the form that you might have completed against someone. If you've completed the form against your supervisor, we certainly don't want that information getting back to the supervisor without CG&I doing our due diligence and making sure that that report has happened. As a result of that, what we have done is we've created a confidential email that you can send information to us so that CG&I can determine what the next steps would be. You see that right there on your screen. It says corporate compliance at CASA-Trinity.org. There's a phone number there. That's my desk phone. We have to have a landline. And the phone number below that is CG's confidential work phone number. So we want people to feel very comfortable in reporting corporate compliance issues to us for a variety of reasons. We don't want you to just sweep something under the rug because that could come back to bite us at some particular point. We want you to understand that it's your responsibility to report those to us. But more importantly than not, any report that is made to us, there is a guarantee that there will be no, and the word just went right out of my head.
So no punitive actions as a result of bringing anything to our attention. We treat them all with, high confidentiality, respect for your concerns, and that's why we, moving forward, are going to be treating these reports to a higher standard.
Yes. Yeah, retaliation was the word I was looking for, CG. That there will be no retaliation. If you have made a compliance report against one of your coworkers or against your supervisor, that person is never going to know who it came from. And we do that because we want to protect the person that has brought that to our attention.
Yes.
Now, something might come of your report, maybe something doesn't, but it always gives CG&I an opportunity for growth and for learning and how we might be able to do things a little bit differently. And quite honestly, this video that we're making is a result of that. We knew we couldn't get to everybody. We wanted everybody to have the same message. We wanted everybody to be on the same page. So this is why we're doing this video.
Yep. So a thing with moving forward, I know it's been a little different in the past, but in regards to any corporate compliance reports, we're asking that you bring them to myself and Michelle first, no one else. So not even your supervisor. Please bring any kind of concerns in this matter to us first. And we're doing that so there's less people involved by the time that it reaches us.
Exactly.
So if it's just myself and Michelle and you as the reporter of that concern, that really helps the investigation keep it closer and the confidentiality and the integrity of that investigation stronger.
Absolutely.
If we, moving forward, I think we're on the agreement that if we find out that, more than individuals than we've talked to in regards to that investigation know about it and are talking about it, there could be some
further issues down the road.
Yes. So, and it's because if something was brought up about me, I wouldn't want Michelle going around and talking about it because then it makes me feel like the confidentiality of whatever I had going on has been broken.
It breaks down the work flow. It breaks down the relationship with your coworkers.
Hmm.
You know, if all of a sudden they now have deemed me, oh, she's going to be the one that's going to write me up for every little thing I do,
Right.
that doesn't make for a good workplace environment. For
Right.
me, it doesn't make for a good workplace environment for my coworkers. So and CG and I completely understand and we are aware of the fact that there's office chit chat. We know that there's discussion around the water cooler.
Right.
All we're trying to do is prevent that. It doesn't need to happen. It shouldn't happen. And we certainly um, don't want the word to get out for you
Hmm.
if you're the one that has made that report. So,
Yep.
because when you talk, the person that you've talked to, they're going to talk. It's kind of like that whisper game we used to play in kids.
Yeah.
When you start it, and by the time it gets to the end,
It's
it's
something totally
something
different.
totally different. So, we just ask that you use your professional integrity to
Yeah.
make sure that you keep these just where they need to be.
And respecting boundaries.
Mhm.
So super important.
Did you want to talk about the confidential number?
Yes. So the nice thing is that so if you were to happen to make a phone call to whether it's that landline or my work cell phone, you can actually dial *67 prior to dialing that phone number, and then that will make your phone number confidential. So just to let you know, especially if you wanted to make it like a super confidential report.
And know that when those are brought to our attention, that we're certainly going to do our due diligence and make sure that that confidentiality is held up 100%. We're
Hmm.
not, we're not going to run to our supervisor and say, hey, this is going on.
Yep.
We have to be very careful with that.
Hmm. This is the corporate compliance reporting form on the S drive. It's a fillable PDF. Please fill that out and then send it to our corporate compliance at CASA-Trinity.org email address. And that way it's easier for Michelle and I to keep track of these. So Michelle and I are the only ones that have access to that email address. So just to let you know that in regards to the confidentiality.
Again, all of the forms will, if you're a new employee, will be found on the S drive. For an old employee, again, they're still for seasoned employee. Let me
Season.
clarify that. They're all on the S drive as well. The reason why we have created PDF forms for all these is it just makes for an easier way for staff to complete these. And it makes for an easier way for CG and I to review the forms. I can assure you that if you were sitting in my chair, you would not want to read a report that I have handwritten because you'd never get through it. I can read it because I wrote it, but we just want to make it as easy for you to complete the report as possible.
Yep. Okay, so protected emails. I know we've talked about this a lot. The importance of this. So we're doing a lot of communication with clients via email. We're doing a lot of communication with outside entities via email. And we understand this part of it. It makes it easier, it's quicker. However, the issue is that if we're sharing protected health information, PHI, so any kind of information about that client without making it a protected email, we're actually violating HIPAA. And if you do that, that actually has to be reported to the Justice Center. So, what we're doing to help ourselves really to remain as HIPAA compliant as we can is that we're able to use these encrypted emails in order to share information with outside entities. So, the easy way to do that is all you literally have to do is write in the subject line protected colon and then whatever your subject line is. That will instantly encrypt that email. Later down the road, we're going to have an encrypt button, but that will automatically do that protected colon in the subject line, but you're still going to have to remember to click that button. We also ask that you do not include any PHI in that subject line. So no names of clients or anything. What I usually do just to safeguard that is I would, especially if I'm sending maybe information to like a probation officer or something, you literally could write protected colon mutual client, something like that. Because even let's say you're sending this email to someone and then you write protected colon and then you write Joe Schmo as that client's name, that the subject line pops up in someone's email
And it identifies them.
and it identifies them. So please do not include any PHI information in that subject line. It's super important.
Let's see, we could use initials, correct?
Yes, you can use initials. But
numbers, patient chart numbers.
I would, for myself though, I don't ever include any of that information in the subject line. Just for the integrity of that, of being HIPAA compliant.
Now, I know, CG, that we've had some pushback from outside vendors with using our encrypted emails, and which then, from a staff perspective, is that they just don't send the email protected. It's our responsibility to make sure that, again, we follow the rules and the regulations set forth by our IT department to send that email encrypted, regardless of whether or not we're receiving the pushback from outside vendors. I know that I have had to send a lot of information, a lot of documentation for the Justice Center or Oasis, and I've had to send it encrypted. And I've gotten some pushback from them saying, I can't open it. What am I supposed to do? Can you send it to me differently? If you want me to send it through the email, then I have to send it encrypted. What I've done that has helped me anyway is that if I have a vendor that is not used to our encrypted email system, I would send them an email prior and say, I'm going to send you an email encrypted, and here are the instructions on how you can open up that email. And lo and behold, by doing that, I have not had the pushback from the vendors that saying I cannot open the email. We also get the question that, because we are doing a lot of communication through email with our patients, can I send a Zoom meeting? Non-encrypted. Yes, you can send a Zoom meeting. It doesn't say what the meeting is about. So yes, you can send a Zoom meeting. What happens if a client or a patient emails us first? This is a very good question. What happens is that email is implied because they have initiated that email, but they're okay with that communication happening through email. But we still, as staff members, have the responsibility. If we're going to respond back via the email, then we have to add the protected colon to that response, because again, it is our responsibility and our expectation that we protect the patient's protected health information. Because you may be talking about treatment in that email. You may be talking about some triggers that they might be having. You may be talking about connections that you're trying to get them connected with. All of that is protected health information. So it is absolutely crucial as staff members, if you're initiating the email containing a PHI to an outside vendor or even that patient, you have to send that protected. If you are receiving an email that's not protected, but you're going to respond back to that, then you have to put the protected colon back in there. CG and I are going to work on some language that might help staff members send that initial email to vendors and patients that are saying that they're having a difficult time opening them. Because they're having a difficult time opening is not our license to stop sending them protected.
Right.
We still need to continue to do that.
Yep. Conflict of interest.
So the conflict of interest is always a fun conversation. It's always a conversation with our seasoned staff members as well as our new staff members. The conflict of interest is a document that is allowing us as staff members to be transparent to our funders, to our board of directors, to the agency. It's something that is done at the time of hire, and then we update as needed, but we also update yearly. We talk about this a lot in our refresher trainings, and we're talking a lot about corporate compliance and conflict of interest in this training, because we want to make sure that folks are completely transparent. A simple example of that is I get hired on as a new employee, and my brother works in another division of CASA-Trinity. I'm going to divulge that information on my conflict of interest form. I want CASA-Trinity, our funders, our board of directors to know that I'm very transparent in saying I'm Michelle Jensen and making it very aware that my brother works in the Livingston Clinic. Why do we do that? Because say, for instance, I apply or my brother applies for another position and I am the supervisor of that position. He cannot work underneath my supervision because we are family. So he wouldn't be able to apply for that position, or he would have to apply for another position that did not fall under my direct supervision. We talk about a lot of our folks work per diem jobs or second jobs in like agencies, whether it be other inpatient facilities, whether it be other hospital settings. You know, write that down. These are not punitive documents. All they are is transparent documents. You're just disclosing that you may, in another light, run into our patients. Our like patients. So we just want folks to make sure that they write that information down. A lot of our staff members are landlords. They may rent to other staff members. We need to make sure that we document that. We don't need to know if you're a waitress at the local Applebee's. Chances are you're going to run into a patient at Applebee's with their family going out to dinner. That's not something that we're talking about here. If you ever have any questions about what information needs to be put on the conflict of interest or where it needs to be placed on the conflict of interest form, don't hesitate to reach out to CG&I. We will do our best to help you with that. The thing that I cannot stress enough with the conflict of interest is it's a living, breathing document. It's not a document that you sign on December 2nd as your hire date and you sign again next December 2nd. If in fact, between December 2nd of 2021 and December 2nd of 2022, there's been changes, maybe my brother has quit, I'm going to take him off my conflict of interest. Maybe my sister got hired. I want to add her. Or maybe I wasn't working a per diem job with like clients. I want to now add that. Or as a landlord, I've now taken on as a renter CG. So the living, breathing document piece is very important. Our human resource department is very approachable. You can get a hold of Dawn in Human Resources. She'll be glad to send you the conflict of interest statement so that you can update it, delete it, add or edit. Because, if you're involved in a corporate compliance report, say for instance, you get reported as taking money from another staff member and you don't think that's right. Well, lo and behold, I've now looked at that conflict of interest and on there is saying that I am the landlord for such and such, and that is why I'm taking money from them. Okay. So conflict of interest can be tricky, so don't hesitate to reach out to us.
This is just a copy of it. This is just the form and HR sends it to you. If you ever have any questions though, once they send it to you, please feel free to reach out and we will help you. So this is in regards to some of the medical record updates. So we now have a form for personal requests for medical records. So this is for when a client comes in, whether it's a current client or a past client that's already been discharged. They can come in and say if they're wanting like a copy of their assessment or anything that we have in their chart, we're asking that they fill this out and then you send it to us in medical records. So myself and Lauren, which we can be reached at the medical records at CASA-Trinity.org. And then we would be able to look at this and then provide you with that information. the reason why we're doing this is that so we know what kind of records are being sent out of this agency so that we can keep track of that. But it's also, say for instance, you had a client come into your session, they ask you as a clinician for a copy of that assessment, and you print it out and you provide that to them. So then that client leaves. For some reason, they go to Walmart. They decided to, they're going to take that assessment in with them because they're going to look at it while they're shopping at Walmart. And then they leave, and then they accidentally leave that assessment in that cart. So they no longer have it on their person. There is a 20-page assessment flying around Walmart with not only CASA-Trinity's name on it, but it also has your name on it as that clinician who completed that assessment. And it also has that client, all of this PHI information about that client flying around. One, it looks like we violated HIPAA big time. And even though you just provided it to that patient. So we have a process to where in order so we're not breaking HIPAA, it's not like we're saying that patient can't have that information. What we're doing is providing kind of like a log of what is leaving. And say, for instance, something like that was to happen, we would at least be able to cover ourselves and say, no, the patient filled this out, they signed a release for it, and this is what we provided them.
We've shifted responsibility, for lack of a better word, to the client, because we now have released that record. We have proof of that. The patient now themselves is responsible for the care of that document.
Yes.
And we are not going to be held responsible if that document ends up rolling around in Walmart, because we've got our paper trail that says, I signed for it, I asked for it, I took responsibility for it.
Yes. So if at any time you ever have any questions in regards to this, please feel free to reach out. It is in the correspondence section in the patient's chart, especially if it's a recent client. If it's already been a client that has been discharged from treatment and they're requesting this, please have them fill this out. Okay, so this comes to the end of it. Like Michelle and I always say, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email addresses are in here, but even like in our email, you can just start typing our names. It should pop up. Our phone numbers are right here. We're always available to answer questions because we would rather answer 30 questions about the same thing in order to prevent an issue down the road than to answer 0 questions and then there's an issue down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're here. CASA-Trinity is an organization that firmly believes in training. That's why we're doing this. We want to make sure that our staff have a complete understanding of their responsibilities. And again, knowledge is power. We've said that 100 times in this training, but for this particular subject line, it is hugely important that we always try to keep this in the front of our brains as best we can. It's a lot of information. We completely understand that. So when you're done and you go home and you go, hey, wished I asked. Again, there's our information. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Mm-hmm. And again, this slideshow, because I know that we're kind of like in the corner of the slideshow, you may not have been able to see everything. It is going to be uploaded onto the S Drive. So for future reference.
What our next steps will be is in HelloSign for our seasoned employees that weren't able to make our previous sessions. You're going to receive 2 documents from Human Resources. One is the acknowledgement that you have participated in the training. For those of you that have participated in the virtual training, there's going to be a box for you that you're going to need to make sure that you check that you participated virtually and not in one of our previously scheduled sessions. For new staff, I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest. I'm sure that Human Resources will ask you to sign off on that acknowledgement as well. But all of those will come from Human Resources through HelloSign, and we want to make sure that staff return them in a timely manner. So we're giving, once you receive that document, we'd like you to sign it and return it within 48 hours of getting that.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. And if any questions, feel free to reach out.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Stop. Wait a second to stop.